And hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon from us here at Just Us Radio Network and our latest episode of One Point of View. This is Jerry Jones and it's Friday the 18th of April or Saturday the 19th of April, depending on where you are in the world. As always, I have with me my beautiful soul sister, Sheila Bolger. Hey Sheila, how are you this fine spring day?
Hi, Jerry. Hi, everyone in the chat room, all those listening. I'm great. It's been a couple of grey days. It's been rain here and there, but I'm happy.
I know. Smile and be happy. That's all we can do. Enjoy the good thing. Oh, we had the most beautiful sunset this evening. It just looking out my bedroom window, and I look, I'm like, whoa, big splash of orange. So it was very wonderful to see.
Did you get pictures?
I didn't actually. I have done in the past though. It goes down across behind the woods. It's very pretty. I should do actually. I will the next time I spot it. But yes, so spring is actually finally here. So I'm happy, even though it goes a bit chilly at night still. But it's okay. It's all good. So So this evening we have with us another extraordinary guest. We have Dr. Richard Dicenso, who is known to many, including myself, as Dr. D. Published author, international speaker, and what has become known as complementary care expert. I'm not so sure it should be complementary. I think it's the real thing. Dr. D has over 30 years' experience in treating the chronic symptoms of VCD, vicious cycle disorder. His way of looking at the human body is refreshing after one of so many medical doctors specializing in parts and areas rather than treating the body as a whole. Whole as in physical, biochemical, emotional and spiritual. Dr. D utilizes a series of caveats to interpret the results of his matrix assessment profile, otherwise known as MAP, where urine and saliva samples are taken and assessed to give a whole picture as to what is going on in the physical body, and identifies imbalances in the normal functioning of things such as food digestion, elimination, burden on key organs, energy production, and nutrient density. With his extensive clinical experience, he is a groundbreaking thought leader in the emerging field of whole person rehabilitation. Using his considerable background in human biochemistry and orthomolecular nutrition, Dr. D has helped thousands of individuals around the world with undiagnosable symptoms to dramatically improve their health without drugs or surgery. He continues to offer his expertise to an international clientele with his mail order evaluation, the Matrix Assessment Profile, detailed in his new book, Beyond Medicine, exploring a new way of thinking, which has received 5 stars from Midwest Book Reviews and Amazon.com. We will be posting and mentioning websites where you can access information about the work that Dr. D does. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. D. Hello and welcome.
Well, hello and welcome to you. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. And from my own experience, I know that the work you do is exceptional. And for me, I believe the completely right direction for where to go for health in the way of whole health, because you are assessing the entire health, and with all these other tests, people don't seem to be able to get to the bottom of problems, whereas you can very often get to the bottom of what's been going on, as mentioned there, and diagnosable situations people have. And with your testing, it seems to be a lot more successful in finding out what actually is going on in the body and the cause. Actually, there was another thing I wanted to, and I'm going to put it in here because it seems relevant. I read on the website. It says, when your body's chemistry is out of balance, it sends a signal to you in the form of a symptom. A symptom is your body's way of communicating to you that something is wrong or out of balance. And while conventional medical approaches like drug surgery or other procedures mask the symptoms, quantum fluid analysis addresses the underlying cause of the symptom. And I'm all about cause, and I think it's fantastic that's what you guys do with what you're doing, you in particular.
Thank you.
So would you like to perhaps, maybe let's start with just a bit of sort of a background on how you, I mean, we got your whole resume of all the things you've done. That's incredible. I even noticed you had some work with equine therapy along the way. And I work with horses. I don't think I've ever actually shared that with you.
No.
Yeah, so that was quite intriguing to me to notice that. So maybe we could come into that later.
Sure.
But, yeah, maybe to sort of explain where you came from. I noticed you got acupuncture in there, chiropractic, all sorts of therapies along the way, and what got you to where you actually are with this MAP process?
Yeah, well, I actually started out, as we were discussing earlier, in the transitional period of the 60s into the 70s, and I originally owned a series of health food stores. And in conjunction with the health food stores, I opened a series of health food restaurants in which I had gardens outside of the restaurants where I grew all of the food and used that as the source for all of the food on the menu in the restaurants. And so over a period of time, I found that people were coming into the restaurants from all walks of life saying, I feel so much better when I eat here and when I leave here. What are you doing with the food? What is it that is so different about eating at a conventional restaurant? And so I explained to them, the benefits of taking the food from the earth and the soil and supporting that environment, if you will, that would contribute to healthy and lively and vibrant foods that then would translate into the biological environment. And so they said, you really need to do something more with this, because just to be doing a restaurant is fantastic, but there's something else here that you really need to be doing. So oddly enough, as life would have it, I had opened a restaurant in Maine right at the exit for a brand new bridge that was transporting people from the southern states into Maine for the holidays and for the summer season. And just before I opened the restaurant, a storm came through and it blew down the bridge. Oh, wow. And so now there was absolutely no access. I had a terrible location at this point because nobody could get to me. They didn't know where I was. They didn't know I existed.
Wow.
And as a result, over a period of a few months, there wasn't enough business to support the restaurant, so I had to take a job as a night watchman in a lumber yard in Maine in the winter.
Wow.
And so that gave me pause for thought, and during that period of time, I really embraced what they were saying about, okay, you need to do something more with this. And so one night, in the middle of the night, I made a decision that I was just going to go to California, and I was going to apply to schools and see where I got accepted and pursue something beyond just the natural food business. And I did that. And so within a matter of a couple of weeks, I had scholarships at Loma Linda Medical School and chiropractic school, and I entered into pre-med. And while I was in pre-med, I explored the curriculums of the various schools that were available to me at that point, and I realized that every single school, no matter what it is, the first 3 years of training are identical. You're trained in anatomy, you're trained in physiology, the function of the body, you're trained in pathology, what happens when something goes wrong with the body, but in the fourth year, every school differed. What do you do now that you have this information about what's gone wrong when the body isn't functioning properly? So if you went to chiropractic school, you had a wide variety of choices. If you went to medical school, you had drugs and surgery. Mm-hmm. If you went to acupuncture school, you had needles. If you went to naturopathy, you had natural substances. If you went to homeopathy, you had homeopathic remedies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I chose the chiropractic scholarship at that point for that reason. And my initial entree into professional healthcare was through chiropractic school. So in my third year of chiropractic school, I started to realize that I was being trained in a trend of thought. And that trend of thought is associated with every single school that you could choose to go to in terms of what it is that you do when someone comes in with a symptom. So if the symptom was a headache to a chiropractor, the solution was manipulation. To a naturopath, it was a remedy. To a homeopath, it was another remedy. To a medical doctor, it was a prescription. And so the question that arose in my mind at that point was, well, how is it that two people with the same symptoms come in and they get the same treatment according to the training that I've received, and we get two different results? One gets better and one doesn't. There's got to be something missing here. So in my third year of chiropractic school, I entered into night school for acupuncture. Got another frame of reference. I became an acupuncturist. And the solution to the headache was insert the needles. And so at that point, I was in California, and a hospital in Beverly Hills called Cedars-Sinai had just opened a program for alternative care in which they wanted to do research on what alternative therapies were of value, why they were of value, and what they could provide that conventional medicine couldn't. And because I was a chiropractor and an acupuncturist, I was the first chiropractor admitted to a medical school-based internship, and had the privilege of being the first chiropractor admitted to a hospital in the state of California. And as part of this program, I began to evolve the question that concerned me for two reasons. Number one, I saw it very frequently where whatever school of thought you were trained in was the school of thought that you were going to administer the appropriate remedy based on your training. And all of the training was not based on thinking, it was not based on assessing, it was not based on evaluating the whole person, it was based on a formula that you were taught as part of your training. And so I quickly recalled the words of Hippocrates that I was exposed to early in my training, wherein he taught his students, number one, first and foremost, it is not so important what disease the person has as it is the person who has the disease. And that opened my eyes to a whole new realm of possibilities. And so the solutions that my mentors were offering me at that point was, well, you just need more education. And so, being naive at that point and young and new to the healthcare professions, I took their advice. So I went to 3 years of training in trauma rehabilitation in San Diego. Came up with another formula for what you do when somebody has something. Yeah. I went through another number of years in homeopathy, in naturopathy. I went through a number of years in orthomolecular medicine, and then I went through 10 years as a forensic examiner, which added another layer of awareness to that which I had already accumulated, but it was during the forensic process that I realized how true what Hippocrates had said, because I was sitting on the witness stand day after day being asked to make a decision about where the truth was in relationship to one attorney saying this is what happened and another attorney saying this is what happened, and I finally realized, wait a minute, there's a truth here that's not being discussed because everybody is invested in a particular outcome. And so as I realized that, I began to search for ways to be able to evaluate how the different elements of the whole person or the human matrix, which is composed of the physical body, the biochemistry, and the psychological and emotional realms, factor in together to create an environment in which symptoms can arise that get diagnosed as diseases or disorders, when in reality, things like hypertension, things like diabetes, things like IBS, things like migraine headaches, these are not diseases. These are symptoms of imbalances, dysfunctions, disorders, and miscommunication within the human matrix. And I began to develop this concept called the matrix assessment profile, with the intention of assessing the human matrix, which involved all three of these realms, which eventually led me to develop my current approach to evaluating and making recommendations to individuals who come to me with all sorts of concerns, called the Matrix Assessment Profile, or the MAP, which has a lot of significance on a lot of levels. For instance, if you want to get from where you are to where you want to go, you need a map. So that has some significance to me. If you're going to assess the whole person, then you need to assess what the whole person represents, which is the human matrix. And then I began to get into the individual elements of each aspect of each of the components of that matrix, and eventually developed what you've experienced at this point as the matrix assessment profile, wherein I take biological fluids, I look at things that nobody else is looking at in ways that nobody else is looking at them, and I translate them into a probable cause scenario and identify the underlying cause of the symptoms that you're experiencing and treat the cause as opposed to the symptoms.
Yeah, you see, that's where it makes all the difference, because you're finding the cause and you're not just treating the symptoms. And
correct.
I'd like to make a little comment here, and it's just based on, I very rarely go to the doctors, but I have been on occasions to check up on a couple of things, and I find it's the same with the medical profession in general as anywhere else I've worked. You get a problem, somebody tells you what the problem is, they type it into the computer, and the computer comes up with an answer. And that's basically it. It's artificial intelligence. That's all it is.
Well, that's one of my biggest issues with conventional medicine, is not that they don't have value. They do. Yeah. And because, one of the caveats in my book, Beyond Medicine, Exploring a New Way of Thinking, is that everything works. But everything works most effectively when it's applied to a specific set of circumstances for which it's most indicated. So if you have a car accident, you break a bone, you have a serious complication with a disease or an infection, medicine has its place. It's not either or. But in my opinion, as you alluded to in the beginning of this interview, that this really isn't alternative medicine. This is common sense medicine.
Yes, that's what I was alluding to. It's about people not thinking.
Absolutely. And one of my biggest issues with the training that conventional practitioners receive is that they're not taught to think.
Yes. And that goes all down the line in all professions that I've come across.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the way of the world now. I was just actually discussing schooling. A lot of the ways of teaching kids is just stuff like pretty much parrot fashion. Learn this. This is how you spell this. This is how you say this. Nobody thinks about how you got to any of the conclusions. You're just told that this is this and this is that, and you've just got to learn it. And then people don't think so much as they did. And the cause thing is, when I first started working with horses, I was shown, horses get certain problems, this happens, that happens. The first thing, what do? The first thing, remove the cause. And I never forgot that. And I've used that for myself and throughout, and that's why I love what you do so much, because you're removing the cause. The cause is the imbalance. Yes. So you're dealing with it and trying to get it back balanced. It's the exact same thing as removing the cause. Once you discover the cause, then you can start to help removing it, and it just makes so much sense that way. So just
it also comes into being here as well that everybody's individual. Everybody has their own way of doing, their own mind, and it's like going back to school. I have a 6-year-old at school, and he's brilliant at everything. And when it comes to reading, they were really trying to push him to sound all his letters out. Well, he can't do that. He remembers words. He's got a great memory. Show him a word once, tell him what it is, and he remembers the next time. He can't break things down and say it phonetically. He just can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone learns differently.
Yes.
But the great thing about this whole profiling here, it's very much individual for each person, each body, and maybe you could sort of start to add in the parts about, taking into consideration the emotional part, spiritual part, all those, the biochemistry, like all of that is involved in this assessment.
Dr. D, sorry, just quickly, you mentioned the three things, and I've forgotten the last one. It was physical, biochemistry, and what was the next one?
The psychological, emotional.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And to put this in perspective, a lot of what we experience and how we experience begins at the moment of conception, which is also, for the most part, ignored. So from the point of conception, you're a live entity living in another human's body, and you're completely dependent on what that individual exposes you to and what that individual experiences in terms of not only the food that you're exposed to, the emotions that you're exposed to, the relationships that that individual's exposed to, whether or not you were even wanted as a child of conception, and the emotional and the psychological interaction between the parents and the psychology of the womb in which you're growing, and the food through which you're receiving through the placenta. And so those are all early factors that are going to determine things like, okay, you've become an embryo, you've become a fetus, you're developing in the womb. You, of course, have inherited some genetics. But these genes that you've inherited do not dictate whether or not you're going to have a particular disorder or disease. They, in fact, only represent a tendency for that gene to express itself in a particular environment, which leads us to the next element of evolution as an embryo and as a fetus, and that is the environment in which you exist during that period of gestation and during the period of the first 6 years of your life, being in the presence of a single parent or both parents or a couple in a relationship who teach you what the world is all about, because you're wandering around looking for information, just soaking up information, integrating it into who you are and who you become eventually beyond the age of 6. And then the element of stress. And so stress is a very complicated but a very simple concept in the sense that it is a perceived threat. So if something that you're exposed to is a perceived threat, not only to you psychologically or emotionally or traumatically at that point in your life, but if it's a perceived threat to your biological environment, your system is designed to respond to that perceived threat by doing a series of very specific things, specifically secreting a series of stress hormones, which have a multitude of impact on various systems in the body as you continue to age. And so up until the age of 6, you're basically absorbing. Beyond the age of reason, you begin to take this information, incorporate it into who you've become, start to make decisions on your own, or simply adapt to what you've been exposed to at that point. But the portion of the brain that's actually responsible for allowing you to make these executive decisions about what's right, what's wrong, what you feel, what you experience, how you're going to respond to it, is called the frontal cortex, and it doesn't fully develop until around the age 25. So up until that point, you've got 25 years of potential to incorporate, to experience, to integrate information that may be partly true or completely false or completely inaccurate, and lays the foundation for the secondary foundation of stress, which is, number one, a sense of predictability. Do you have a sense that you know what's going to happen from moment to moment, day to day? Are you reasonably secure in that feeling and awareness? Number two, do you have a sense of control? Do you feel like, okay, no matter what happens, I still am able to participate in controlling the outcome? Number three, do you have social support for what it is that you believe, what you experience, and what you encounter on a day-to-day basis? Do you have people you can talk to, that you can share with, that you can relate to? And number four, do you have an outlet for the frustration that you experience in response to the onslaught of stresses that accumulate over the course of a lifetime, let alone up until the age of 25, when you're fully capable of then making decisions about how to deal with things? So by that time, you are a pretty significantly solidified personality, which ultimately leads to the concept that you, I, and everyone on this planet are the biological end product of our interpretation of our perceptions. And therein lies the foundation for the psychological and emotional, or the psychogenic influences, because we're perceiving with the five senses and with the skin, which is a huge receptor and actually reacts much faster than the brain, because by the time the brain interprets what we're exposed to, the skin, the body, in and of itself has already perceived it. So you are exposed to a perception of something or other. You interpret that perception based on your past experiences, your beliefs, the elements of reality that you've been exposed to. You interpret that perception. You internalize that into a mechanism of coping or responding or reacting. And in response to that, basically these influences, these interpretations occur through two mechanisms. One is electrical and one is chemical. And both of those not only provoke responses in the body, in all the tissues, organs, and glands, in the brain, but they also degrade into a biochemical waste product that can accumulate into a toxic wasteland in terms of the biological fluid in which all 50 trillions of your cells have to live every day, based on that interpretation of the perception that eventually becomes the biological end product of everything that you're exposed to.
So if I'm understanding you right, Dr. D, we're talking about things that influence you, your conditioning when you're brought up, and things that might have been put in your mind. For instance, if one of your parents have had breast cancer or something, you get these feelings, these intuitions basically, that come through your skin, and then they make their way up to your brain, and your brain interprets them according to the beliefs that you've grown up with, and then those signals actually return into your body with, how can I put this? Supposing it's gone to your brain and your brain has decided that your conditions mean that you're on your way to breast cancer, then that signal is going to go back through your body and produce that.
Correct.
Yes,
Correct.
yes.
You know, and that's the level of cause that is missing in conventional medicine, because, you know, doctors aren't trained that way. They don't have that awareness. They don't have the time to deal with that with every individual that comes in the door. And, you know, I manage about 10,000 cases a year. And the average physician manages far less. And there is no reason, other than the system that they're involved in, the economics involved in that system, And the way that system is set up to respond to people who come in with symptoms, not diseases, not disorders, but symptoms. You walk into a doctor and you say, my elbow hurts, let's take an x-ray, you have arthritis, now you've been diagnosed, you have a disease, no you don't. You have the symptom of pain in your elbow that's now been labeled as arthritis, but it may be there for the reason that you've accumulated an excess burden of acidic toxic waste in your body in excess of its ability to get rid of it on a 24-hour basis. In order for it to be stored in the body before it can be eliminated, it has to be buffered or neutralized because it's acidic, it's toxic, it's corrosive. So the body uses minerals to do that. If you don't have the minerals in your diet or you have more waste product than minerals, then the body begins to steal calcium and phosphorus from your bones, leaving you susceptible to arthritis and osteoporosis.
See, it's in some way that people wouldn't just even start to think that way.
No.
And when you describe it like that, it makes so much sense. And I'm always talking about everything in life being a balance, and this is a prime example.
Yes.
Exactly, and with my family, I've got 6 sisters and a brother, and It's always been a case of we have arthritis in our family.
Right.
Everybody gets arthritis, and they keep saying to me, take this and take that. I said, no, I will not get arthritis. And I'm 63 now and never had it. And everybody else is getting the same systems. It's just like they're creating it all along.
Yeah, because they're expecting it. Yeah.
Yes.
And they've embraced it. And in fact, they even have a word for it now that what you won't see a lot in conventional medicine, but it's called a premature cognitive commitment. It's something you've been exposed to as a belief. Yep. You've embraced it as part of your whole person, and now you're going to exhibit that response based on that belief.
Yes, it's what we're always talking about. We create our own universe, and we're actually creating our own universe inside our body as well. It's like I always say to people when they have symptoms and they say, oh, it's my whatever. Yes. And I keep saying, don't keep saying it's yours. Don't own it.
Or I am a diabetic, people.
Yes.
It's like, stop it.
Yeah.
Yes. They own it. And instead of, it's just a signal. It's just a message saying, hey, something's out of balance, get it sorted out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, the role of stress cannot be underestimated in these scenarios, because when you understand the stress mechanism in the body, there are 2 glands called the adrenal glands that are like little jellyfish, and they sit on top of your kidneys, and their primary job is to monitor the environment internally and externally for perceived threats, and then to communicate that perceived threat to the 50 trillion cells in the body via a series of hormones that they begin to secrete. So when they secrete these hormones, the cells get the message, hey, there's a knock on the door, open the door, hey, there's a stress hormone saying there's a perceived threat, we don't know what it is specifically, but you need to go into protective mode, and in protective mode, the cells in your body only store enough food and oxygen for 3 seconds. So every 3 seconds, they're opening up to this toxic environment, grabbing a few crumbs, doing the best they can to maintain the integrity of the intracellular environment, which is the same as the environment of the human body as a whole: digestion, respiration, elimination, repair, regeneration, and reproduction. And given the lack of raw materials to perform these functions over a period of time, accelerates the aging of the cells, called biological aging, which will then compromise the ability of the cells to perform within the tissue, the system, the organs, the glands in which they exist, as then their function begins to deteriorate into a compromise, doing the best that they can with what they have to work with, and then you start to see symptoms of those compromises begin to emerge. You see your hair start to fall out. You see your problems with the skin, problems with the hair, with the nails. You see issues associated classically with a thyroid problem, which in reality is a thyroid involvement, because initially the adrenals send a message to the pituitary gland to recruit the assets of the thyroid gland to assist it in maintaining its other functions, which are regulate blood pressure, regulate blood sugar, regulate mineral balance, regulate water balance. And if this goes on for an extended period of time, the constant introduction of stress hormones into the biological fluids then starts to have other complications, exhibit other complications, such as diverting blood away from the digestive system. So now you've developed a digestive difficulty that involves not being able to break down, digest, absorb, utilize nutrients from the food. That undigested food passes through more slowly, putrefies into an acidic waste product in excess of your body's ability to get rid of it, so it has to be dumped into the fluid in between the cells, contributing to the perceived threat, contributing to that toxic environment, and in addition to that, suppresses the immune system, suppresses the production of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and insulin, leaving you subject to early menopausal symptoms, hormonal problems, diabetes, suppresses the production of a gas in the brain called nitric oxide, which regulates the production of endorphins and dopamine, which are the feel-good hormones, now leaving you susceptible to anxiety, depression, early dementia, and Alzheimer's, and diverting blood away from the portion of the brain over the eyebrows called the prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive decision-making, recall, focus, memory, paying attention, leaving you susceptible to things like ADD. And all of these things now are popular diseases, disorders, based on the proliferation of perpetual release of stress hormones, the nature of the stress hormones, the volume of the stress hormones, and in particular, a stress hormone called glucocorticoid that is more specific to the cardiovascular system because it scars or forms a disruption in the interior wall of the smallest vessels, the furthest away from the heart, causing inflammation at that junction, narrowing the inside wall of those vessels, attracting into that inflammatory waste product that's accumulated in the vessel the low-density lipids, the bad cholesterol. So those levels are going to go up, and you'll be diagnosed with cholesterol problems when in reality what you have is a glucocorticoid problem. And then the narrow wall of that vessel furthest away from the heart has to work harder to pump the blood back to the heart, slamming the blood back into the walls of the heart at high velocity, causing conditions like cardiomyopathy, mitral valve prolapse, hypertension, and you walk into the doctor's office, you get these values checked. Okay, you have high cholesterol, you have hypertension, here's 2 drugs for that, when in reality, what you've been doing is producing high levels of glucocorticoids, and if that issue were identified and treated and reversed, all of those symptoms known as hypertension, diabetes would disappear.
And they
Sorry, Dr. D, could I take you back a minute? I didn't want to interrupt you there, but you said something about a 3-second timeline.
Yes.
What, can you explain that again? That's interesting.
Yeah. The cells in the body are in one of 2 modes at any given time. They're in growth mode or protective mode. When they're in protective mode, in response to a perceived threat that is initiated by the presence of the stress hormones, they only store enough food and oxygen for 3 seconds. Okay, so every 3 seconds they have to open up, grab crumbs, close back down again. So they don't have a lot to operate on long term. If you're subjected to long periods of stress or you're exposed to intermittent periods of consistent stress over a long period of time, two things happen. Number one, you get the side effects of the prolonged exposure to the stress hormones, but then your recovery time in response to those stresses becomes longer and longer and longer, making it even more difficult for the systems that have been compromised by the presence of the stress hormones to recover from that stress and to resume normal function.
That's really interesting because, you know, if something happens and you're thinking to yourself, no, this isn't right, I've got to correct the way I'm thinking, you literally only have 3 seconds, which makes me understand why things keep coming back even though we're trying to correct it.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So much to learn that people aren't aware of in the slightest. And like you were saying, you know, you go to the doctor and you come up with those evaluations of certain numbers, and they're like, okay, take this drug for the rest of your life. Instead of that, there's a way to fix the imbalance and get everything flowing correctly in the body, and get it back to nature. And this body is such an incredible creation that when it is in balance, look what it can do when it's completely out of balance. Like all the people that are in completely big mess, and they stay alive. It's incredible how the body actually adapts in the way it does, and I understand more and more about how it does adapt from the things I've learned from you and what you've just been explaining, and how valuable it is to learn what is possible when you actually look, like you said from the beginning, you started to think about what the solutions could be, and instead of just like, oh, that's the fix for this and that's the fix for that, let's find out what the cause is. Let's see what we can do. What's wrong? Why is it not balanced? This is an incredible creation, this human body. Let's make it get back into balance. Balance is the answer to pretty much everything in life, I think.
It's pretty scary, really, when you see all these things that, you know, a doctor prescribe you drugs and they say you need to stay on these for life, particularly with high blood pressure. And the latest one they're always talking about is high cholesterol. Can you explain a bit about high cholesterol for me? Because it makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Okay. First of all, 80% of the cholesterol in the body is produced by the liver, and only 25% comes from diet. So if you have an environment, a biological environment, in which a huge amount of excessive, acidic, corrosive, toxic waste has accumulated as a result of psychological or emotional contributions, as a result of the ongoing exposure to stress, as a result of a compromise in digestion, in which incompletely digested food passes through the body more slowly, and as it does, it putrefies into an acidic waste product that contributes to this pool of acidic waste product. Then the body has to buffer that stored waste product until and unless the raw materials are available to bind to it, to process it through the liver and eliminate it through the kidney. So the body has 3 choices at this point. It either is going to access minerals in the diet with and or your supplements. It's going to use water, so it'll retain water in an attempt, a secondary attempt to buffer the acidic nature of this waste product, or it's going to steal minerals from your bone. Now, irregardless of what resource the body uses to buffer this stored waste product, the fact of the matter is there's still an excess accumulation of acidic, corrosive, toxic waste in the fluid in between the cells in the body, called the interstitial fluid, that is a perceived threat that has now put the cells in protective mode. So, in response to this acidic, corrosive, toxic waste pool, which has the potential to encroach on the exterior walls of the blood vessels and cause them to thin, cause them to become fragile, cause them to crack, the liver increases its production of cholesterol as a form of spackling, as a form of coating the interior walls of the blood vessels to prevent the blood vessels from becoming fragile enough that they might burst, that they might crack, that they might, you might experience an aneurysm. And as the interior walls of the blood vessels become coated with this excess cholesterol, a couple of things happen. Number one, your cholesterol increases. Number two, the interior walls of the blood vessels become more narrow, causing the heart to have to work harder to pump the fluid that's in the cardiovascular system throughout the cardiovascular system. But because that fluid in the transport system is the primary dumping ground for the acidic, toxic, corrosive waste product, the more waste product that's dumped in that fluid, the thicker, the sludgier, and the gummier it becomes. So now you have a narrow vessel, you have a sludgy liquid environment, you have a heart that has to work 10 times harder to pump this fluid throughout the various blood vessels in the body, particularly the smallest one furthest away from the heart. You've got the stress hormones creating scars and inflammation in the vessels furthest away from the heart, increasing the rate and intensity of the return of that blood flow back to the heart. And so now you have a diagnostic profile that basically labels you as high cholesterol, hypertension, potential heart disease, atrial fibrillation, mitral valve prolapse, cardiomyopathy, and any other number of cardiovascular disorders, on top of which, because of the presence of the stress hormones, the other hormones have been suppressed: progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, and insulin, leaving you susceptible to be diagnosed with the anxiety, the depression, the hormonal imbalances, and or type 2 diabetes.
That's just amazing how everything goes around in circles, and it just says over and over to me that your biological body is a computer on its own. It's calculating risk and putting out the information to counteract that.
Constantly.
Yes. Mm. Okay, carry on, Jerry.
Yeah, no, that was a really very interesting way to understand. So we know that the medical doctor is just going to give us a load of drugs, and that's never going to cure the problem. It's going to mask, and it's going to maybe put the numbers where they like them. But
there you go.
That's going to help in the long run in actuality. So your solution is, let's have an explanation of what we would do with such a scenario that you just described.
Right. First step in the process is remove the perceived threat, which is triggering everything that I just described, which is the excess accumulation of the acidic burden. So remove this burden, number one. Number two, stop you from producing more. In doing that, we have to identify the cause which is contributing to you creating it in the first place, and then saturating your body with the raw materials that it needs to restore normal function in a unprotected mode as opposed to protective mode. So in other words, restoring the integrity of the cellular environment to the growth mode as opposed to the protective mode, saturating the body with the raw materials it needs to function normally, and then giving the body ample time to incorporate all of these nutrients into restoring, regenerating, and maintaining normal function.
Right. It's just a completely new way, new compared with what so many people are used to. And, it's a very similar thing to, one time I called in to your question thing about the fact that at the beginning of my MAP evaluations, I had, I think, 2 of the 3 main infections. And after, I think, at least the second or third one, I was down to, and definitely by the 4th evaluation, I had no infections at all. It's like, well, how can that happen without, taking antibiotics or this or that? And you describe by making it that those are opportunists, and they could survive in the environment which I'd started off with. But by the time I cleaned up my environment, they couldn't survive anymore. And it's the same with that sort of thing. If you clean up the environment, everything normalizes and balances.
Correct, because it's no different than the genetics that we talked about earlier. You can have the gene or the trait for a particular disorder, but in order for that trait to express itself, it requires a particular environment. And so the environment is everything. And same goes with opportunistic organisms. They're opportunistic because they're looking for an environment that's going to support their ability to proliferate and regenerate and perform the activities that they're designed to do by their nature. And so if they don't have that environment, they can't produce the symptoms any more than a gene with a particular trait can express that trait in the absence of the appropriate environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really interesting because what keeps coming to my mind all the time is the micro and the macro, the way we think about everything and the way we do things. It's just the same as people say, not even about health, but the way they act is because of the way I was brought up. Well, I was brought up the same way as a lot of people, but act totally different. It's just people just stay in that little box all the time. It's amazing. There's actually a question for you in the chat room, Dr. D. Are you familiar with the Master Cleanser by Stanley Burroughs?
No, very much so. Yeah, I've used it for years.
Oh, because then she says, how does he feel about its efficiency for an elderly person?
Yeah, very effective. As a matter of fact, one of the first books I wrote was called 40 Days in February, and it was based on a study I did with 300 students, subjecting them to different kinds of cleanses and different kinds of fasts, and then documenting what the results and the responses were, and having documented where they were when they started, what their age was, any conditions, their health status, etc. And the Master Cleanse actually was one of the most effective, most efficient, and most widely effective approaches to restoring the integrity to a biochemical or a biological environment.
Cool. And George says he's just finished a Master Cleanse, so well done, George.
Yeah.
What actually does that involve? What do you use for that?
Well, there are I haven't seen the most recent configuration of it, but generally it contains the elements that the body requires to remove the acidic burden. So it's got, number one, it's got a high mineral content in it, which is what the body requires to neutralize and bind to the existing waste product. Number two, it's got elements in it that not only remove toxic waste from the interstitial fluid, the fluid in between the cells, but also from the colon. It also includes elements that increase the efficiency of the elimination process, and it includes elements that contribute to the regeneration and the restoration of a normal cellular function in a normal cellular environment, but it's all done at the same time as opposed to being done in stages. So it's a very comprehensive, it's a very thorough, and it's a very well integrated approach, which is why I think it's so effective.
Cool. Cleanses definitely seem to be definitely a good way to get started, to clean up the digestive tract even to start with. It's a good place to start,
No doubt.
And don't forget to take your mind with you.
Yeah, clean your mind too. Open it wide to all possibilities.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, I certainly know personally that I was able to heal a physical manifestation by healing my emotional wounds between retaining anger and resentment, and also I need to do a lot of forgiveness. And for me, I absolutely know for a fact that you can clean up physical manifestation with cleaning of the emotions. So all of these things come within one other thing I think I'd like to mention to the listeners is that not only do you take the samples, you take the urine and the saliva samples, but you also do a full questionnaire so that you can take into account what's going on in people's lives.
Yes.
And maybe you could describe that a little bit and the importance of that part of it.
Yeah, that, again, goes back to the original statement from Hippocrates in not so important as to what disease a person has as to who the person is that has the disease. And so it really helps me to understand who the person is that's experiencing these things. What are your beliefs? What are your attitudes? What are your behaviors? What's your lifestyle? What's your diet? Do you exercise? How much water do you drink? What kind of foods do you like? Do you enjoy eating? You just eat out of obligation? Do you have a belief system spiritually or religiously? If you do, have you attempted to apply any of the precepts within that belief system to your healing process? And what it does is it gives me a 360-degree view of what this person's existence is like inside their own head. So do they, when they write me smarmy responses to some of these things like, well, it's none of your business, or what difference does that make? And then I understand that they don't understand.
Yes.
And then the other things are, the other extreme is they tell me nothing. You're the doctor, you figure it out. So that's another mindset, okay? That's, a pretty closed mindset that's going to be difficult to interact with because they don't want to share. They're typically hiding something or typically just unwilling to share it because they've been previously hurt, they've been traumatized. And so it gives me a great deal of insight into that psychological and emotional dynamic, in addition to some specific information about lifestyle choices and beliefs.
Yes.
I'm just talking to Maria in the chat room again because she's saying about the cleanse. Why does it seem so much harder for me to stay on it than it was 25 or 30 years ago? And I'm just asking her what makes her feel that she has to come off it. She hasn't yet answered. Do you understand anything about that? Is it easier when you're younger than as you get older?
No. It's a mindset thing.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it's because the cleanse in and of itself isn't hard or easy. It is just a cleanse. And so it's your interpretation of the perception of what that cleanse represents to you at this point. Are you willing to let go of what needs to be cleansed at this particular point? Is there a barrier preventing you from embracing the benefits of that cleanse? Do you not feel worthy? Do you feel like you don't deserve it? Do you feel like it's entirely too much work for too little results? Do you have a belief that it, in fact, even if you did do it, you're too old or you're too far gone for it to have any benefit for you? So a lot of the resistance at that stage is psychogenic. It's psychological and emotional. It's not so much physical.
Yeah, she's actually saying that she felt extremely nervous and desired to eat something, and she fell off after 4 days. So it's probably everything that you've said above, yes. Yeah,
it's very interesting how much it's a lot of the belief.
You are worthy, Maria.
You are worthy, yes. We're all worthy.
And it's not to blame. No. It's an awareness, because here's the key, is you are responsible for everything that you experience in your life once you become aware of the fact that you're responsible for everything that occurs in your life. Yeah. And in knowing that, you can embrace that, you can detach yourself from the experience, and you can acknowledge the fact that, okay, I'm experiencing this. Maybe I don't know why, but I do know that I do deserve it. I am worthy.
Yes.
and that there is benefit, and that I'll pursue it to the degree that I can without blaming myself for failing.
And it is probably a case of, as well, we get all this into our head from all over the place. Well, it's just because you're old. There's this thing about
too late.
Yeah,
it's not worth it.
Yes, it's old age. Everything's down to old age.
Yeah, that's a real belief one. It's like, well, I am getting older, so people start to expect things to go wrong, and I'm like, I'm not going there with any of that. I'm not buying into any of that getting old thing.
And it's being fed by the conventional system. I mean, I know you've read my book and you recognize that, one of the things that drives the profile for me is when people are told, look, we can't find anything wrong.
Yeah.
We have to run more tests. We have to wait and see. The symptoms are normal for your age. Okay? Whatever that means. Or it's all in your head.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, the system is set just to keep you in the system, and any way they can, they'll keep dragging you down, unless you don't buy into it.
Exactly, and you can always tell the mindset of someone by how old they look.
Yes.
It's just like, I see people the same age as me, and they look like they're twice as old as me. It's just amazing, really.
It really is.
Well, I saw a simple, stupid study that I'll share with you because it also happens to be very effective. And with people who have become encrusted in a particular lifestyle or belief system, you can do something as simple as take a pencil and ask them to put it between their lips. And immediately what you'll see is that the muscles in the face draw down around the pencil because you're holding it with your lips, and it triggers a cascade of hormones that are associated with depression. And so their body language will change, their facial expression will change, and their mood will change immediately. But if you take that same pencil and have them hold it with their teeth, the opposite occurs. All the facial muscles elevate, activating the limbic system associated with dopamine, associated with antidepressants, and their mood will elevate, their EEGs will change, their entire posture will change, and their entire demeanor will change within minutes.
Wow.
That's really weird because I've always got a pencil in my mouth. And I always hold it in my teeth, not in my lips.
There you go. Pencil therapy.
There you are. Cool.
I was just holding it in my lips just now, and it does feel totally different.
Do you think we should take ourselves a little break then? Now we're kind of like halfway through, and come back, and I'd like to go into the VCD a little bit,
Okay.
Dr. D, because that's a large part of the analysis and everything. So
I'm just and just one more thing that Maria's saying before the break. She's saying that one of the underlying things, I think, is like she was saying that she doesn't think that way about getting old, but she just doesn't want to do any further damage to her body, and she didn't know if being older her body would be able to handle being on a cleanse or something like that.
Well, what did Henry Ford say? Whether you believe you can, or you can't, you're both right.
Yeah.
That's it, yeah.
I proved that one about doing the bike ride. I said to myself, I can't do this, I can't. Somebody suggested I did this big, long bike ride, and I said, no, I can't, I could never do that, And then I'm like, but if I keep saying I can't. I said, you know what, I can do it, and I did. At almost 50, I rode 166 miles across the island of Jamaica. And I kept saying, I could do that. I'd never do that. And then I'm like, I could.
I think what the reassurance is needed is that, it won't damage your body no matter what age you are.
Yeah. So that's...
No, absolutely not. It'll do nothing but contribute.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Let's take a few minutes here. Got a little song for a few minutes, and actually this is quite funny about Catch My Disease. So let's go ahead with this.
Okay.
Join us on Just Us Radio Network for our shows Inflowment, Unity in Community, Numbers in Time, The Indigenous People's Voice, One Point of View, Walking the Talk with Kurt, and the People's Round Table. Check out our website for information about upcoming shows. Just ask Google to find Just Us Radio Network, and you will find links to our website and to our Blog Talk and Facebook pages, as well as to our podcast, where you can subscribe for automatic downloads. Well, and welcome back. Here we are again. That was a nice little bouncy, dancey tune, Sheila. I love that one.
Yes, hi, I'm here. Sorry, I was just scrolling down this list here. I was looking for anything to do with herbal medicines.
Which list are you scrolling down?
I'm looking down Dr. D's list here.
Oh, right. Well, Dr. D does all sorts of things, so you can ask him anything about anything like that. If you want to, go ahead.
Are you there, Dr. D?
I'm here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking. What have you had to do with herbal medicines?
Well, I continue to be involved with it.
Right.
Formerly, I spent about 5 years working with homeopathic and naturopathic remedies. Everything from Bach flowers to traditional Chinese herbal medicines, and found a way to integrate them into the protocols when they were appropriate for a couple of reasons, either to the nature of the underlying cause that was contributing to the symptoms someone was experiencing, or I deal with people in 55 countries right now, and everybody has a belief system, okay? Which is why when people ask me, well, what's the perfect diet? Well, the perfect diet is the diet that works for you, okay? One of the caveats, again, in the front of my book is everything works. Everything works most efficiently when applied to a specific set of circumstances for which it's most indicated. And those circumstances don't just mean physical circumstances. They mean psychological and emotional circumstances as well. They mean premature cognitive commitments to a belief system. There are people that are complete devotees of a raw food diet, complete devotees of an all-meat diet, and everything in between. And so actually one of my earlier books was called A Question of Balance, in which I addressed this issue, which was, all right, you have to, number one, be in touch and aware enough that you can make decisions based on what you feel is going to work best for you. So I can make recommendations, but then you may look at the ingredients in some of the things that I suggest and say, well, I have a problem with this. I have a problem with that. I don't tolerate this well. I don't tolerate that well. Well, these are all good things to know because I'm not forcing you to do anything. I'm not encouraging you to do what it is that I suggest. I'm making recommendations based on my evaluation. But if you have, for instance, a spiritual belief associated with not eating anything with a face, I honor that and I support that. But then I show you how to enhance the effectiveness of that particular approach to the healing process so that you get more benefit out of it. Because inevitably, I'll give you an example. About 10% of my practice is stage 4 breast cancer. And 70% of the females with stage 4 breast cancer are vegetarians. Now, I could immediately jump to the conclusion that vegetarianism causes breast cancer. But I don't, because when I deal with each of the individuals with the symptom of breast cancer, they all have a different mindset. The breast cancer has emerged for a different reason, not associated with the diet. And so the belief system is a big part of working with an individual and being respectful enough to honor what that belief is, as long as it's not blatantly harmful, blatantly contributing to what they're experiencing, and blatantly interfering with the constructive response to the healing process. And most of the time, this is going to involve the psychological and the emotional aspect of the tridimensional being, the physical, the biochemical, and the emotional. So I'll use herbs when they're indicated within the context of the whole person I'm trying to assist in moving in the direction of correction, as I will use other alternatives. For instance, people that don't want to take supplements, they don't want to take pills, they don't want to take tablets, they only want liquids, they only want herbs. Well, there are equivalents in every element of the healing arts that will effect similar changes in specific systems for the individual that is experiencing that problem, that has a premature cognitive commitment associated with those elements. So, for instance, I might offer you something that across the board, scientifically, has been proven, double-blind studies, no doubt about it, that this is a substance that is going to dramatically improve your health, but because of a premature cognitive commitment, you have a resistance to introducing that into your human biochemistry, and it's going to produce the opposite effect because of that belief system. So we have to find something that's going to be more congruent with what it is that you believe, that's going to produce the same effect. To give you an example, there are people that absolutely refuse to take a product with soy in it. This is a big issue now across the board because of a lot of misinformation, number one, and number two, because of a lot of false beliefs associated with the being itself. The fact that people like I don't want to mention any specific names, but they're doctors that are using scare tactics to divert people away from incorporating soy into their diet, that are basically selling them a product as a soy substitute. But the most recent studies, now this is the extensive study of hundreds of thousands of people and thousands of articles, the executive summary of just specifically dealing with soy, the bean itself, that it's not only is it one of the most highly researched and seemingly debated food compounds in the peer literature today, thousands of articles related to the health effects of soy that have been written in the modern literature. The majority of the available data, the preponderance of the evidence, indicates that soy is a healthy and safe food compound because all of the studies to the contrary that produced all of this controversy were done in test tubes, not in a human population, not in the human body. And so the result of the most recent studies that's all over the literature within the last 6 months is soy's been cultivated as a crop, a food crop, for more than 1,000 years. Soy as unfermented tofu and soy flour, along with fermented soy and individual soy compounds such as soy oil, have been and continue to be a staple food in traditional Asian diets across a broad range of socioeconomic classes, with no evidence of any disease or disorders that we've come to attach to the use of soy. Legumes, including soy, are very common food compounds found in traditional diets all over the world as part of a healthy diet, and actually confer health benefits, including regulating blood sugar, preventing cardiovascular disease, reducing the risk of cancer, and in menopausal symptom relief and support for osteopenia. All of these studies done in the human body, while a small number of studies done in test tubes express some concern related to the biochemistry of soy compounds, while the in vivo data, or the data done in the human body, absolutely fails to document, confirm, or demonstrate any estrogenic and proliferative potential of prudent soy intake. So bottom line is, while prudent intake of soy is well characterized, pharmaceutical application of high-dose isolated dietary compounds remains controversial as to its benefit and safety when the studies are done in a test tube and not in the human body. So that gives you one example of one of the controversies that I encounter on a regular basis, because people surf the internet thinking that they're doing research when they're not actually being exposed to the real research. They're being exposed to an interpretation of the research that then contributes to their premature cognitive commitment, that then reinforces their belief system, that then activates and perpetuates and actually accentuates the behavior associated with that belief.
I think the big problem these days, Dr. D, is that people are very aware of how our crops have been mutilated with sprays and with GMOs and everything like that. So it's a big concern for people. What should they eat and what has been contaminated?
Yeah, and it is, but there are valid sources for that information, and I hate to say this, but I'm one of them, and I'm one of them because I'm deeply involved in it. I'm almost 40 years into this now. I'm on top of the literature. I see everything that comes through. I see where it comes from, who does it, who produces it, and how well documented it is, and how well referenced it is. So I have a different perspective when it comes to things like even fructose, when it comes to things like magnesium glycinate. There are issues with all of these little things, and there are issues that you could focus on, and there are potential risks with everything, including walking out the door tomorrow morning and getting hit by a bus.
I'm going to come back there in a minute about high glucose, what that fructose. Hold on one second. Yeah, I just want to take you back, because the reason I asked you about herbs is because so many people now all over the world, as well as quite a few of our friends now, are going back to the land. They're growing their own food, and so they're looking at growing herbs and flowers for health benefits as well. That's why I was asking you. And is it that supplements contain a higher concentration, that it's better to get those than to try to do your own with herbs or flowers or whatever?
Number one is diet, okay? And so they're doing all the right things, they're making all the right moves, and that's exactly what they should be doing. However, if they have already accumulated an environment that is counterproductive, that requires some specific intervention with specific nutrients on a short-term basis to alter the premature cognitive commitment associated with the perceived threat that the biochemistry in the body is experiencing, that has resulted in the vicious cycle disorder of blood being diverted away from the digestive system, not being able to access the nutrients in the food, not getting the benefits from those undigested food particles, creating a leaky gut syndrome. Then they have a vicious cycle disorder in which food in and of itself is not going to restore integrity to the environment. It will maintain it once it's created or recreated, but food in and of itself is not going to resolve those conditions.
That's it. And I'm going to, let me just see, what was that question Maria asked? Have I missed
it's actually George, because Dr. D mentioned fructose. And,
yes.
everybody's interested in your perspective.
And because let me tell you what happens to me, right? Every now and then I'll eat something that's got some syrup that gets into my throat, and when I go and look at it, what happens is I actually can't breathe. I start going, and I'm trying to cough and get something out of my lungs, but I can't breathe. And when I finally manage to get my breath back and go and look at it, it's always got that high fructose corn syrup in it. It really, really affects me.
There's a difference, though, between high fructose corn syrup and actual natural fructose. So.
There you go. You just said it.
Yes.
But I would be interested in fructose, as in actual natural fructose, because there have been some natural doctors say, but you can only take a certain amount of even natural fructose, because fructose is the biggest bad sugar. So I would love to hear your perspective on fructose as a natural sugar.
Right. As with all things, it depends on the source, the manufacturing process, the compilation process, the way that it's manufactured, combined, preserved, presented. For instance, you know that if you go into a grocery store, that you are safest shopping on the outer perimeters of the grocery store, because that's where all of the closer to nature foods are.
Right, yeah.
Anything on the interior aisles is yes, and it requires a shelf life. And in order to do that, fructose included, it needs to be chelated to a metal. And therein lies part of the problem. So fructose in and of itself as a sugar is a low glycemic form of sugar, as is D-ribose, which a lot of people object to when I recommend this to them as a supplement. But D-ribose is a 5-carbon sugar that is innate to the body's biochemistry, that the body uses very efficiently to process and produce energy through the mitochondria. So fructose, pick a name, pick a subject, pick a topic, pick a food. It all boils down to the same thing. How is it produced? How is it manufactured? How is it extracted? How is it preserved? And how is it incorporated into the form that you're presented with when you introduce it into the body? And so you can use the glycemic index as a key, as a guide to which sugars are going to produce less or more of a result. And fructose is right at the bottom of the glycemic index, or right at the top, depending on how you look at it, in terms of being a sugar that the body can relate to and can use in restricted quantities. But that being said, there are certain situations where you don't want to use fructose, which goes back to the caveat of everything works. You don't want to use the fructose in an environment where the disorder, the dysfunction, the imbalance, the deficiency in the body has accumulated into the symptom of IBS, because the fructose will elevate and escalate and aggravate any of the digestive disorders that have been created over a period of time as a result primarily of the presence of the stress hormones. So it's always context. It isn't this is good, that is bad, because there is no inherent good or bad in any of this. There are cultures that eat, for instance, I don't mean to be gross here, but there are cultures that eat feces as a food staple and survive quite well on it, because their genetics, their gastrointestinal tracts, their family histories have been using this as a food staple for a period of centuries. And so it's really inappropriate to pick on any of these things and say, well, they're good or they're bad. They're both, given the environment, which relates back to one of the other caveats in the beginning of the book, is everything is what it isn't. So fructose is good, fructose is bad, but it really depends on context.
Yeah, and the main question that's coming in, and I've always had this question too, when we're talking about the fructose in fruits, is is it there are certain people out there saying, well, even with natural fruit like bananas and grapes, which are very high in sugars, that we should restrict our amount. But then there's people that are fruitarians. Like we have a friend, Chase Binney, who's a fruitarian pretty much, and he's like about 10 to 15 bananas a day. So obviously everybody's body's different, but as a sort of average, would you feel that the fructose in fruits should be restricted for somebody that loves eating fruit?
No.
Yeah, it's not a really dangerous thing.
No.
Interesting. Cool, that's good to know. So
it's really a case of what's natural doesn't do you any harm. That's really the case.
Yeah.
It's like I was saying, I understand that fructose is totally different to fructose corn syrup that I was talking about. I was just alluding to the fact that something's been added to that causes a severe reaction to me.
Yeah,
that's what I was talking about.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you're getting the reaction to it.
Mm.
Cool. Okay, so we've got to learn. I'd just like to get you just to talk about the vicious cycle disorders, because I think that's an important part of your work.
It is, and it's at the core of most of the work that I do, because, as I sit here and speak with you tonight, I'm looking at about 300 intake forms that have come in the last week, and I look at the section that asks for the reason for seeking this evaluation. And so I'll see things like type 2 diabetes, blood pressure, sleep disturbance, sexual dysfunction, weight gain, pain, atrial fibrillation, allergies, mood swings, mild IBS, and as if that weren't enough, I just recovered from a stroke. This is all one person.
Wow.
Okay, now that's a vicious cycle disorder, all right, where something occurred originally, and probably in the form of, in those formative years, in the early environment, and perhaps some form of trauma that got translated into behaviors and beliefs, that got translated into food preferences, that got translated into adaptive behaviors, that got translated into premature cognitive commitments, and whatever. Inevitably, I can't say this with 100% of certainty, but when I see these kinds of profiles come in, I inevitably look immediately for the elevation in the glucocorticoid and stress hormone levels, which typically initiate a process this convoluted and this severe and this extreme that's just manifest in all of these different directions, because it's, when you think about it, it's almost humanly impossible for one person to have this many things going on at the same time simply because they are.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. There's a reason for
Something's it. Something's causing it again.
Yeah,
and the old cause.
Part of my job as a forensic examiner, and part of my job in the context of forensic examination, doing the kind of work that I do, is part detective in terms of, okay, I see all of these symptoms that you're experiencing, and then I read the rest of the evaluation and what the beliefs are and what the lifestyle is and what they think about themselves. And I'm always struck by a very famous study that was done called the Framingham study on heart disease, which was the largest study ever done. And when what emerged out of it originally was what they considered to be risk factors for cardiovascular disease, which is where we got all the standards and the parameters for things like cholesterol, for things like the triglyceride levels, for things like the elevated, total, not only the total cholesterol, but the relative relationship between high density and low density lipids. And all of these things that you commonly hear are risk factors for cardiovascular disease. And the reality is that these aren't the risk factors. When the study was reevaluated a few years ago, they went back and looked at this 40-year study, and the risk factors that came out of it that they conventionally associated with your risk for developing cardiovascular disease, and guess what they found? They found two things that were actually the risk factors that created the behaviors that drove people to engage in certain activities that created these alterations in their biochemistry that left them more susceptible to cardiovascular disease than people who weren't participating in these behaviors that elevated cholesterol and triglycerides. And those two things were, number one, job dissatisfaction, and number two, self-dissatisfaction. Were driving all of the behaviors that elevated the potential for the risk factors to exist. And then subsequent to that, in conjunction with that study, they identified the fact that the majority of heart attacks occur at 9 o'clock on Monday morning.
Yes. Yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
This is where it's so important what you do, that you put all those pieces together, whereas this medical world are just like looking at the symptoms, putting a Band-Aid over it and saying, off you go, take these drugs and you'll be fine. It just isn't working. But people just perpetuate, and the more you try and point them in directions of doing something alternative, the more they're like, oh, but the doctor says if I don't do this and don't do that. And it's so hard to open people's minds to there being more to these physical manifestations than just a physicality.
And they get so stuck and panicky if the doctor tells them that they have to take this for the rest of their life.
I was told I had to take a drug for the rest of my life. I said, I'd rather die.
Yes, I was told that, and I gave it up.
I'd rather die
that was
than take
several
drugs.
years ago, and I haven't.
And this is 3 years later, and I'm still alive and kicking and doing way better than the average 53-year-old.
Before we go on any further, Dr. D, I'd like to put on air, because for the people that are listening, none in the chat room, could you go through the names of your websites and how people can contact you?
Our parent site is matrixtransformation.com. Matrix as in the movie The Matrix. Mm-hmm. Transformation as in the word transformation, but all one word, matrixtransformation.com. Mm-hmm. And that is the quickest, easiest, fastest way to get access to everything that we're about, everything that we do, everything that we have to offer. And
And so how...
Go ahead.
Yes, carry on.
I was just going to say, and that's just the beginning, because we're in the process now of developing an expanded version of the site that will be released in June that's going to include opportunities for people to represent our products and benefit financially from representing them. And we're creating a membership site in conjunction with that for people that want access to things like the 350 videos that I have available on different topics, audios, the interviews from my radio shows, interviews with other people who've been guests on my radio show, additional articles that I've written, research that I've produced, all of the things that go into making what I do. And then as a third function, we've created a doctor's training program where we're taking medical doctors into full-blown training and teaching them how to incorporate the matrix assessment profile into their conventional practices. So we just finished up with a beta testing, and interestingly enough, just as a side note, 90% of the individuals interested in the program are females, and 75% of those have been out of school only 3 to 5 years, and they're already fed up with what they were not taught. And of that 75%, 60% of them are internal medicine doctors.
So it's all about people coming out with new eyes and looking at things rather than people who are stuck in that belief system, really, and that is a belief system.
This is actually more powerful than the population of gay people that are coming out or have been coming out in terms of the stigma associated with you breaking away from. How could you break away from the conventional concept of modern medicine when we have so much to offer, and yet we, in fact, don't bother to look at who you are. We tend to focus on what it is that you have.
And that's what's happening all over the world now. It's what I call the spiritual awakening. Yes. It's not just in medicine, it's in every area of education. Scientists are walking away because they're not getting answers to what they really feel. It's in every direction. People are starting to walk away and understand that there's so much more to what's being shared with the general public.
Yes, yes.
And it's all about the money as usual.
Yeah,
Sadly.
Yeah, it is.
That's what I'd like just actually so that people can understand what is involved, how simple this is. I mean, I can describe it because I've done the testing and the reasonable fee that is charged here to do this. Basically, you order the package, and it's about $230, and it includes the shipment of the kit to you. Mm-hmm. You have everything you need. You put your saliva and your urine in the special containers. You put them in the box. You put them in the FedEx bag, and you take them to FedEx, and it goes back again. That's all part of the package. And then you also get the evaluation, the recommendations, and the complete evaluation emailed to you, and you can print it out or just look at it on your computer, and you can see what's going on in your body. And that, for me, is a enormous value to find out what's going on in your body. And you go to a doctor to get any kind of anything, and it costs you an arm and 4 legs.
I know. I'm just going to bring this up here because I know people in the chat room and people I know as well. Depending on where you are, I know a lot of people. When you mention 230, they're going to go, because many people are living on a shoestring and they just don't have access to all this information. Do you get people that are emailing you with questions?
Every day. I personally answer 30 to 50 a day.
Right. Because that is the thing. It's the same the world over. If you have some money to spare, you can have whatever you want. Yeah. If you have no money, you're just left in an ever-ending loop, really. You can't, yes.
Yeah.
But it's at least people know where to go and do some research and look at things they can help. And the things that you suggest, the supplements and things, are they available in health stores, or would you suggest they get them through you?
Well, I do 2 things. I don't sell supplements because it's a conflict of interest. So what I do is I've partnered with certain companies that produce certain specific things that are what's called GMP rated, which is the equivalent of an FDA approval, which means that they have to go through and pay a lot of money for the good housekeeping seal of approval, meaning that what you read on the label is 97% absorbable by the time it hits the human body, as opposed to over-the-counter supplements, which on average, because they're extracted from metallic sources, are absorbable at a rate of 3 to 5%. Mm-hmm. So, you may be saving some money by buying a $6 supplement, but you're also not getting the benefit of it.
The other thing people are going to ask is those that do have insurance, can they use their insurance for your processes?
80% of the time, if they submit on the forms that the insurance company provides them with, they'll get reimbursed personally.
And for their supplements as well?
Yes.
Okay, that's a good thing for people to know. Carry on. I'm sorry for jumping in there.
That's okay.
In the middle of it.
The other thing was that because we deal with so many people in so many different countries, I make recommendations based on places where we either have companies that we're associated with that have distribution in those countries or that can ship to those countries, but I also produce a separate set of recommendations that are generic, that give people a variety of choices so that if they can't access any of these things in whatever country they're in, like oftentimes this happens in Austria or in the Netherlands or in Africa, for instance, they get a full generic set of recommendations so that they can just take that list, go to a local health food store, and they can buy the things that they need there.
Yeah, so you've got every option to get what you need. Yeah, that's fantastic. Cool. So we were talking a bit before about the VCD. We got a little bit into that, and maybe just like to describe a little bit more about that, because it's an important thing for somebody that's got one of those undiagnosable diseases or problems or situations that they can't find the answer to and none of the doctors can help. And I think this is where you help big time.
Yeah. VCD is basically a house of cards. It's a domino effect. Something initiates an imbalance or a deficiency that inevitably is rarely, if ever, picked up in the initial evaluation, but it manifests itself as symptoms. So this is the individual who goes to their doctor and says, I just don't feel well. And so they say, well, let's take some tests. Well, all your tests are normal. Well, the symptoms are normal for your age. Well, we'll have to wait and see. Well, let's take more tests. Well, we found nothing, so the symptoms must all be in your head. And yet this person is suffering from either a psychological or emotional compromise as a result of the stress hormones depleting the nitric oxide in the brain, or the stress hormones diverting blood away from digestion, compromising digestion. And I'll give you an example of how this might work and go undiagnosed for a period of time and lead into a vicious cycle disorder. Is someone is exposed to either early in life a stressful environment or a trauma that initiates the stress response, and it is extended over a long period of time. And so it becomes more frequent, it becomes more intense, and the recovery periods become much longer, causing the effects to be that much more dramatic. So in regards to something like a digestive compromise, it could be something as simple as the blood being diverted away from the digestive system, and as we discussed before, the undigested food, which contains the nutrients, putrefies into an acidic waste product, moves through the system more slowly, causing congestion and stagnation in the transport system for the elimination of waste and delivery of nutrients to the cells. But in the interim, the body is going to make an attempt to compensate for this specific scenario, and it does so by increasing the fluid pressure in the small intestine in hopes that it's going to be able to suck these undigested food particles with all these nutrients in it into circulation and be able to access these nutrients and deliver to the cells. But in reality, what happens is the fluid pressure is so great over such an extended period of time that the pores in the small intestine become enlarged, and now you have a leaky gut syndrome in which not only are you absorbing these undigested food particles full of nutrients, but all of these other things that you're exposed to in the course of day-to-day life, bacterias, viruses, H. pylori, the medications, the side effects of the medications, the heavy metals that the medications are chelated to, all begin to leak into the system and drift into other systems in the body, causing other problems, which I'll describe in a moment, but in particular, these undigested food particles that have now been absorbed successfully, full of nutrients, sitting there in the bloodstream waiting for those nutrients to be extracted, are foreign substances as far as the immune system is concerned because they don't recognize them. And these foreign substances are then treated as a threat to the body, and the immune system initiates an immune reaction, and so now you're told you have food allergies, when in reality you're not allergic to the food. You're allergic to the undigested food particle that contains the nutrients that your immune system doesn't recognize. So the complication here went from increased stress to inability to access the nutrients, to an attempt on the part of the body to absorb those nutrients by increasing the fluid pressure, increasing the size of the holes in the small intestine, making available these undigested food particles to the immune system, creating an allergic reaction. So now, not only do you not have the nutrients that are available in the undigested food, you've got nutrient deficiencies, you've got leaky gut syndrome, you've got food allergies, and you have stress hormones wreaking havoc in every area of your body, including suppressing the immune system, slowing down your metabolism, and diverting blood away from digestion, making it impossible for this house of cards to reverse itself on its own.
Wow. Yes. It's just so much more to all of these things than meets the eye, but once you understand, it makes all the difference. So that's really helpful to understand those sort of things, how it's actually very simple, but it seems very complicated. You get led down the wrong track with all the wrong diagnoses and things.
Oh, very much so, because you're going to get treated for each one of those symptoms.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and it's a problem with all this treatment of the symptoms. So the great thing about what you're doing is just that you get to find out what's the cause, and that's what's so fantastic. And I'd love people to, really start to understand that they can really find out what's going on in their body. And I'm going to find a way, maybe on the website actually, Sheila, we could post up just an example, like maybe one of my profiles, when you can see what's going on in your body. And it's a really it's wonderful to be able to see what each of your organs is doing in the way of whether they're in good, bad, or in different condition. And mine went
it would be a good idea to do that on the website, to have a health page.
Yeah, we could certainly post up. I mean, I've got 4 evaluations now at this point, and I went from being all sort of like red and orange and yellow to being almost all green, which is good. So, and your
title of your website, really, I love it, Matrix
Yes.
Transformation. That's just where we are right now.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, I think it's just a wonderful thing, and as many people as I can, tell this about this I do. And again, people are a little bit kind of wary about going in and what they think is a different direction. But once you get to understand what's actually able to happen, it starts to get you really encouraged that that's the way to go. For me, there's no other way to go than to find the cause.
Well, it is the direction of correction, Jerry.
Yeah.
And
there you go.
It's important to know going into this thing that this is not an event. This is a process.
Yeah.
And unlike conventional medicine, where you're prescribed a medication, you get an immediate result, which may be, for the most part, productive, but ultimately what's going to happen is your body's going to acclimate to the dosage. You're going to require either more of it or a different form of it in addition to it, and it's going to produce side effects long-term that are detrimental to the body, and multiple medications are going to interact with each other, creating even more symptoms that are going to be treated with more medications.
Yeah.
And so long-term, there's really no benefit to letting the tail wag the dog.
Exactly. It's not a solution. It's just a temporary solution. It never gets it the whole way.
Right.
Cool. Well, that's really great. Sheila, have you any more questions before we're kind of heading out towards the end of the show?
Oh, I've got 1,000,001 questions, but not enough time to ask them.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not really saying questions. I'm talking about we could have long discussions about this because it's so interesting. Yeah. And I just love the way, Dr. D, that you're bringing everything, your intellect, your awareness, your knowing, your intuition, and everything together. And that's what many people are doing these days. That's why I call it the spiritual awakening.
Yes.
It is, yeah. Thank you.
And the book Beyond Medicine is a very good description of what's going on with Dr. D, and the way, especially for people that don't really understand at all that there's other elements than what's going on in the physical body. And it's a great introduction to people that haven't really gone there with that idea that there's more than just meets the eye, because there's all those things that you can't see. So,
and what I find amazing in these times, that there's so many people in every branch of anything you could ever imagine that is breaking away and saying, no, this isn't right, this is a better way to do it. And for people who sit and say, the world isn't changing, I just don't understand. Yeah. They must be walking around with their eyes closed, because everyone here now is born to do something, and everybody is on a path to making a difference. I mean, when I say everybody, I mean people that are aware.
Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it better. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's why Jerry and I are doing these radio shows. We don't just, like I say to people, we don't pull names out of a hat. We look at someone and we immediately feel a resonance with them, and we ask them to come on and chat. And it's always such an interesting conversation.
It always is, absolutely.
Well, I thank you. Thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, and I think we could talk on for hours, but it's been wonderful to have got this much information out there, and there'll be plenty of people hopefully listen to this on the archives as well. And so matrixtransformation.com, that's a pretty easy one to remember and to keep in mind. And thanks to everybody for joining us. Is there any last thing you'd like to say, Dr. D?
I'm really grateful for this opportunity, because the reality of what I do is that I couldn't do it without you.
Yeah, so we're all in this together.
We're all in it together. Thank you.
Awesome. Wow. Thanks so much, Dr. D. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening.
It's my
I just want to say over the air, because someone is saying in the website, the other website is optimalawareness.labs.com.
Yeah, Optimal Wellness Labs. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. D. Thank you, everyone in the chat room and everyone who listens to the archives. We are all here to make a difference. Good night.
Good night. Thanks, Dr. D.
You're welcome. Thank you. Good night.
Join us on Just Us Radio Network for our shows Inflowment, Unity in Community, Numbers in Time, The Indigenous People's Voice, One Point of View, Walking the Talk with Kurt, and the People's Round Table. Check out our website for information about upcoming shows. Just ask Google to find Just Us Radio Network, and you will find links to our website and to our Blog Talk and Facebook pages, as well as to our podcast, where you can subscribe for automatic downloads.